In the vast expanse of the galaxy, civilizations thrived, each driven by their own dreams of conquest, survival, or peace. Yet when the Galactic Council intercepted a strange signal from Earth, they were stunned by what they heard. Humans, a species once known for their wars and dominance, were now paralyzed by fear of conflict. How could a species so powerful, so determined, now tremble at the thought of war? The Council's astonishment grew as they discovered the truth. Something had shattered humanity's resolve, forcing them into silence. But what they didn't expect was the shocking twist that would unravel their assumptions and reveal the strength humanity still held beneath their fear. The signal was unlike anything the Galactic Council had ever encountered. It wasn't some elegant transmission filled with encrypted wisdom or triumphant declarations of interstellar conquest. No, this was different, chaotic, broken, and almost desperate. The message came in bursts, jumbled frequencies filled with erratic beeps, crackles, and what sounded like anguished murmurs. The language was unintelligible, as if the humans were speaking in a tongue no other civilization could comprehend. The transmission wasn't just fragmented, it was a mess, and yet there was one thing the Council couldn't ignore: fear. Humans afraid of war, came the familiar, rasping voice of one of the reptilian delegates. Its scales shimmered in the dim light, reflecting the baffled expressions of the other council members. A species capable of such destruction, afraid of war. There was a pause, a long one. The council chamber filled with an eerie silence as every species, from the insectoid swarm to the crystalline mines, pondered the impossibility of it. "We've observed humans before," said a soft-spoken representative, their crystalline eyes gleaming with confusion. "They're not known for their restraint. Their history is littered with conflicts. Why would they suddenly cower in fear of war?" The reptilian delegate shrugged. Perhaps the fear isn't of war itself, but of what comes after. The end result, annihilation. Perhaps they're afraid of losing everything they've built. Imagine building towers so high only to watch them crumble. Who wouldn't tremble at that thought? Another delegate, one from a gaseous species that couldn't help but float ominously, added, "But they've always thrived on chaos. War was their fuel, their drive. Why the sudden shift?" The crystalline being's shimmering form emitted a low hum of thought. "That is what puzzles us. Civilizations rise and fall, but humans were meant to conquer, expand, explore, dominate. They were supposed to be the rulers of their own destiny. Instead, they've become prisoners to their own fear." The council members began to shift uneasily. Fear wasn't just a natural emotion, it was a pathology, one none of them had anticipated from a species that had long been seen as aggressive and relentless. The humans, the council now realized, were no longer the same. They were something broken. "How is it possible?" a towering figure with pulsating tendrils asked. "They're advanced. They possess technology that should have propelled them beyond such petty concerns. What catastrophe could have reduced them to this state?" The reptilian delegate let out a long, almost mournful sigh. Perhaps they have seen the truth of their own destruction. A truth we have yet to understand. Maybe it's not just their technology that failed them, but their very nature. The council had always seen humans as conquerors, driven by ambition, survival, and the need to dominate. They were a species that thrived on conflict, one that expanded and expanded without fear of the consequences. And yet here they were now, reduced to whispers of panic and despair. Fear had turned them into something unrecognizable. "Unbelievable," said the gaseous delegate. "This isn't just fear of war. This is fear of themselves." A murmur rippled through the chamber. For the first time in history, the Galactic Council found itself grappling with an enigma far greater than they were prepared to handle. Fear wasn't something they could measure or control. It was an alien force to most of them, especially to those who had never known the sensation themselves. The council knew they couldn't simply dismiss this signal. It wasn't just another disturbance from a struggling, isolated species. No, this was different. This was something catastrophic, or so it seemed. Humanity wasn't just afraid, they had made fear their ruler. How can a species that once ruled entire galaxies fall into such disarray? One delegate wondered aloud. The humans of today, what are they but shadows of their former selves? Perhaps, the crystalline delegate said slowly, they are merely echoes of what they once were. They've become ghosts of their own past. The council had always assumed they knew humanity. Conquerors, destroyers, and builders. But this new humanity, the one trembling in fear, was an anomaly. Something had stripped them of their old certainties. They had no choice but to investigate further. If humans were now afraid of war, what had they become? And more importantly, what could they still become? The Council sent their fleet toward Earth, unsure of what they would find but certain of one thing: this wasn't just a story of fear. It was a chapter humanity hadn't written yet, one that would redefine everything they thought they knew. The fleet drifted silently through the void of Earth's solar system, their advanced sensors scanning the once vibrant planet and its desolate surroundings. A place that had once pulsed with the energy of billions now radiated emptiness. The stars shone brightly above, but beneath their light, Earth lay in ruins, an abandoned ghost of its former self. What could have led them to such an outcome? Asked the robotic delegate, its synthetic voice devoid of emotion, though tinged with an eerie curiosity. Have they destroyed themselves? The shimmering blue light of another delegate pulsed softly as they remained motionless, their crystalline gaze fixed on the planet. Or did something beyond their control destroy them? Silence followed the question, heavier than the void itself. The fleet hovered, their sensors probing the surface below, trying to unravel the enigma that was Earth. They expected to find signs of human activity, thriving megacities, towering skyscrapers that stretched into the heavens, colonies sprawling across the surface, each a testament to humanity's once unmatched ambition. Instead, they found only dust and decay. Not a single trace of civilization remained. The once mighty megacities, once teeming with life, were now reduced to crumbling ruins. The twisted remnants of roads snaked across the barren landscape, fractured and forgotten. Forests had overgrown what remained of human structures. Mountains loomed over silent valleys, their slopes littered with the detritus of a bygone era. The robotic delegate studied the endless silence of the world below. They vanished, wiped from existence as if they were never here. Another delegate from a species of gaseous beings who drifted in slow orbits chimed in. No cities, no signals, no signs of technological advancement. The voice stretched out into the void, almost as if it was trying to will the evidence into existence. How can a species that once ruled space disappear without a trace? The blue light flickered again as the crystalline delegate stared at the desolation. Perhaps their very presence has become a myth, a tale that even they no longer believe in. The fleet pressed closer to the planet, their sensors detecting faint energy signatures human life. Faint, distant, nearly imperceptible. The signals were weak, lost in the void. They had nearly ceased broadcasting, their transmissions reduced to static whispers. Yet they lingered. Some part of humanity had managed to survive. But what remained of them? Fear had driven them to the brink of extinction, they knew that much. These weak, scattered signals seemed to confirm the worst. And still they wondered, why would a species that once thrived on conquest now cower in the shadow of their own fear? The robotic delegate analyzed the readings, its cold logic processing every anomaly. Survivors, weak, scattered, but alive. For now. The blue light flickered again, its glow dimming as though overwhelmed by the sight before it. Barely alive, it muttered. Barely enough to call life. The truth struck harder than the silence itself. The humans had not just withdrawn from their mighty existence. They had retreated into the cracks of their own despair, too terrified to rise again. The fear they broadcasted once of war had become something deeper. It wasn't just a fear of conflict, it was a fear of existence itself. Why are they still alive? The robotic delegate asked. If they were consumed by their own fear, wouldn't they have extinguished themselves long ago? The crystalline delegate emitted a low hum, uncertain. Perhaps the fear of annihilation is stronger than the desire for survival. Maybe their fear sustains them in a state of perpetual limbo, clinging to whatever scraps of life remain. The fleet continued to scan, the faint signatures growing weaker, more sporadic. The once mighty civilization had devolved into a relic of itself, a shadow of what they had once been. They clung to a fragile existence, hiding in fear of their own shadows. What remains of them? The gaseous delegate wondered aloud. Are they even human anymore? The silence stretched, heavy with uncertainty. The signals continued, barely audible, whispering the echoes of a past they could no longer comprehend. And yet, there was one certainty: whatever humanity had become, they were no longer the conquerors the Council had once known. They had become something new, something fragile, something lost. The Council's fleet orbited high above Earth, their sensors scanning the remnants of a shattered world. Below, humanity's past wasn't just a story of wars fought, it was a nightmare replayed on every scarred battlefield, on every broken city. The few remaining humans huddled in scattered enclaves, distant from one another, survivors clinging to the ruins of their once mighty civilization. The echoes of humanity's long-forgotten wars still reverberated, but now they were not of conquest, but of sheer terror. What has reduced them to such a state? A tentacled delegate from a bioengineered species mused, their many eyes blinking slowly. Are they living under the shadow of some ancient curse? The remnants of human civilization made themselves known. Small, scattered groups of survivors eked out miserable existences, scavenging the remains of a world that had once flourished with life. The Council observed them through their high-tech sensors, fragile, fragmented, and terrified. Gone were the confident empires and sprawling cities. Now humanity had become nothing more than frightened shadows of themselves. They are no longer the masters of their domain, a delegate from a species resembling towering crystalline giants observed. Their voice was hollow, void of emotion. There is no unity, no leadership. They have become fractured, disconnected. Indeed, the signs were everywhere. The humans had devolved into fractured enclaves, struggling to survive in isolation. No great armies, no mighty fleets, just small groups of scavengers, huddled in the remnants of what once were bustling metropolises. Every scan revealed the same thing: fear, paranoia, and isolation. The Council couldn't help but wonder, how did a species that once dominated their own planet, that rose from the depths of primitive chaos to the heights of technological mastery, become so pitiful? What had obliterated their once unstoppable expansion, reducing them to these desperate enclaves, hiding from their own shadows? Their fear, the robotic delegate said, a hint of metallic frustration in its voice. It has consumed them. They no longer seek to conquer or expand. They fear even the thought of war. Another delegate, from a race of fluidic beings who floated like liquid clouds, sighed. War, they've seen its face far too often. They know it too well. It has torn their worlds apart, their empires to dust. Maybe they've simply decided that fear of war is better than the certainty of destruction. But even with the explanations, the Council was left grappling with one disturbing truth. Fear wasn't a natural response for a species like humanity. They had always been driven by conflict, by the need to push boundaries, to dominate, to explore. They weren't a species meant to cower. So what twisted the very fabric of their nature? What force could have broken them? The hive delegate pondered, their many eyes swirling with uncertainty. What has shattered their will, their very essence? It wasn't just war they feared anymore. The war had come and gone, leaving nothing but a scarred wasteland. It was as if the human spirit had been crushed beneath the weight of their own failures. Their history of conquest, of unrelenting ambition, now felt like a distant memory, something they had left behind in the ruins of their once great civilization. We've watched civilizations rise and fall, the crystalline delegate said, their shimmering form flickering with an almost mournful glow. But none like this. None that descended into such quiet despair. Perhaps they've seen the future, the gaseous delegate offered, drifting slowly. Not as a beacon, but as a warning. Maybe they fear not war itself, but their own inability to survive it. The Council drifted in silence, absorbing the gravity of what they had witnessed. Humans had always been a species defined by their ability to endure, to rise from the ashes of conflict. Yet here they were in these fractured enclaves, no longer warriors, no longer conquerors. They had become something far more pitiful. I sense no strength in them, the hive delegate said, only fear, fear of the past, fear of themselves. Fear. It clung to them like a shadow, a plague that had slowly consumed every trace of their once formidable will. The remnants of humanity were no longer driven by ambition, by hope, but by the haunting echoes of their own mistakes. What happens when a species gives up? The robotic delegate asked, as if speaking to itself, when the fear of their past becomes greater than the hope of their future. It was a question the Council couldn't answer. Instead, they were left to wonder, was there any way back for these humans? Or had they truly become nothing more than wandering ghosts of a once great race? The human survivors weren't even aware of the Council's watchful gaze from above. They had become ghosts of their former selves, clinging to forgotten knowledge that told tales of a past they couldn't escape. Their world, once vibrant and full of life, had been reduced to a barren wasteland scarred by the echoes of their own mistakes. The Council uncovered ancient records buried beneath the rubble of humanity's technological ruins. These fragmented archives spoke of a time when humanity's thirst for power led them to unlock weapons of unimaginable destruction. Weapons capable of wiping out entire cities, of reducing thriving metropolises to ashes in the blink of an eye. They weren't just stories of conflict, they were records of apocalyptic events that humanity had once believed they could control. But control had failed, catastrophically. They believed in their own invincibility, a delegate from a race of towering crystalline beings muttered, their voice reverberating through the silence of space. But their own arrogance was their undoing. The Council sifted through these ancient tales, trying to make sense of the madness that had consumed humanity. They discovered a dark truth. Humanity had once wielded forces beyond comprehension, forces that had obliterated entire regions in their desperate bid for survival. Their history wasn't just marked by war, it was shaped by their own suicidal tendency to unleash weapons far beyond their control. This knowledge is forbidden, a scholar from a peaceful agricultural race observed, their voice tinged with caution. Their history speaks of tools they were not ready to control. The more the Council delved into these records, the more they realized the depth of humanity's trauma. It wasn't just war they feared, it was the memory of the destruction they had unleashed upon themselves. The survivors weren't merely frightened of conflict, they were paralyzed by the memory of what they had done. They don't fear war, said a delegate from a vast, tentacled species, their multiple eyes scanning the data. They fear themselves. The Council had long thought of humans as a species driven by ambition and conquest. But now they saw them as something else entirely paralyzed not by some external threat, but by their own forbidden knowledge. The weapons of mass destruction they had unleashed weren't just lost to time, they haunted humanity's very essence. Every flicker of their past now loomed over their present like a phantom, whispering of annihilation and ruin. What have they become? Asked a representative from a race of gravity-affected beings, their voice heavy with dread. How can a species so mighty be reduced to this? The human survivors clung to scraps of history, fragments of ancient knowledge they couldn't fully comprehend. They told tales of cities that once rose to the stars, now reduced to ash and dust. The very concept of warfare had become taboo, a dark specter haunting the fragile remains of humanity. They had once been the masters of destruction, but now they were its victims. They seek to escape their past, said the crystalline delegate. But how do you escape from something that has become your very identity? Fear wasn't just embedded in their consciousness, it had consumed them. They didn't merely live with the fear of war. They lived with the dread of what they had already done. The Council couldn't help but wonder how much of humanity was left if the memory of their own destruction had reduced them to ghosts of their former selves. The Council knew they couldn't simply abandon Earth. To leave humanity to their fate would be to accept their extinction, and that was something no sentient civilization could abide. The humans' fear wasn't just of war, but of themselves, of their own mistakes, and of the weapons that had once held the power to end everything. If humanity was to have any hope of survival, they would need more than simply isolation or fear, they would need an awakening. It was clear to the Council that if humanity was to reclaim its lost strength, they would need guidance, not through force, but through understanding. The Council knew the power of knowledge wasn't just in what you could destroy, but in what you could rebuild. They wouldn't interfere in human affairs, not yet, but they could offer something far more dangerous than a fleet of warships. They could offer hope. The Council established a silent presence near Earth's orbit, their massive fleets drifting like silent sentinels, their minds focused on the small, fragile world below. The humans couldn't see them, couldn't comprehend their vastness or their silent watchfulness. But the Council began to transmit signals subtle, encrypted messages filled with ancient wisdom, history, and tales of resilience from other civilizations. The signals weren't loud. They didn't demand attention or offer salvation. No, they were subtle whispers in the void, almost like a breeze that carried the scent of possibility. At first, there was no reaction. The humans were too lost, too mired in their fear, to notice. Their days were consumed by scavenging, by survival, and by the shadows of their own past. The records of their wars echoed in their minds, haunting them like ghosts of the very destruction they had wrought. They didn't ask questions they already feared to know the answers to. The council's messages went unnoticed. But slowly, something began to shift. A faint flicker of curiosity stirred in some those whose fear had grown too great to ignore, whose isolation had become unbearable. They were the ones who dared ask questions they had long avoided. Where did the knowledge they sought come from? Was there something beyond the ruins, something they had forgotten? The council watched as a small number of humans began to pick apart these strange signals, carefully decoding them, piecing together fragments they had dismissed as myths or madness. There were whispers of forgotten history, of civilizations that had survived catastrophes far greater than their own. Slowly, the humans began to listen. The awakening wasn't instant. It wasn't grand and triumphant. It was cautious, hesitant. Humanity, after all, had every reason not to trust. The echoes of their past had told them only of destruction. But these signals weren't filled with commands or threats. They were simple reminders of what they once were, of what they could become. They're listening. A delegate from a species of floating spheres observed, their voice a quiet hum. Slowly, but they are listening. They seek answers they don't even know they're looking for. Another added, answers buried beneath their fear. The council could feel the subtle shift, barely perceptible at first, but undeniable. There was no immediate surge of hope, no sudden embrace of a brighter future. Instead, there was hesitation, doubt, and quiet introspection. The survivors began to look up at the stars again, not as distant observers, but as creatures longing for something beyond their crumbling world. The council realized they had become witnesses to something rare, something they had rarely encountered in their countless journeys through the galaxy. Hope wasn't something that could be forced or manufactured. It was something that had to be earned, even from the ruins of despair. Are they waking from their nightmare, a gaseous being pondered, or simply dreaming of a different kind of nightmare? The crystalline delegate, who had long observed the human survivors with a steady, unwavering gaze, spoke with a quiet certainty. They are remembering. Not the past they fear, but the potential they've forgotten. The council didn't know if the humans would ever reclaim their former glory, but they knew one thing: the seeds of something greater had been planted. Whether humanity would rise from the ashes or sink further into fear was yet to be seen. But for now, they watched and they hoped. Years drifted by like whispers through the void as Earth's quiet survivors began to emerge from the darkness. The once fractured enclaves of humanity, isolated, terrified, and broken, began to stir. Slowly, they began to rebuild. Their leaders, once disconnected and scattered, finding common ground in the shared pain of their past. The fear that had once consumed them like a plague began to lift. It didn't vanish overnight, but like a slow, stubborn fog, it started to dissolve. They had carried the burden of their mistakes long enough. The echoes of their wars faded, replaced by quiet determination. Their transmissions once screamed in panic, but now they whispered of hope, of resilience, and of a future beyond their nightmares. The council watched, their curiosity giving way to a quiet sense of awe. They had been astonished by humanity's descent into fear, but now they found themselves marveling at something far more remarkable: humanity's ability to rise from the ashes of their own destruction. "It's happening," one of the crystalline delegates murmured, their voice almost reverent. "They are finding their strength. They've become something new," the robotic delegate noted, their cold, mechanical tone tinged with something almost resembling admiration. "Something beyond what we expected." The survivors, once consumed by the memories of their catastrophic past, now began to look forward. They didn't forget what they had endured, but they refused to let those memories dictate their future. The old fears, the knowledge of their own destructive power, had become a part of their history, not their destiny. Humanity had learned from their mistakes. They had once been conquerors, driven by the need to dominate, to expand, to control. But now, they weren't just survivors, they were rebuilding. Not out of desperation, but from a newfound sense of purpose. In their scattered enclaves, they began to rebuild what had been lost. Cities didn't rise from the ashes overnight, but seeds of growth were planted. Crumbling roads were cleared, forests thinned, and human hands, once trembling in fear, began to craft something new from the ruins. The council saw this transformation. No longer were they fragmented and isolated. They had learned to come together, not as conquerors, but as survivors seeking harmony. They're not afraid of war anymore, the tentacled delegate mused, their multiple appendages shifting thoughtfully. They've accepted their past mistakes. They've embraced coexistence, the robotic delegate observed, their metallic voice tinged with wonder. They no longer define themselves by what they lost. For the council, humanity's rise was a sight of hope, not just for the species itself, but for the galaxy at large. No longer were they a cautionary tale of destruction. They had become something far more intriguing, something that hinted at a future filled with potential. They have returned to the stars, the crystalline delegate said, their shimmering blue light intensifying. Not as destroyers, but as explorers. Humanity had come full circle. They had been conquerors, masters of war, and survivors of destruction. Now they were something more, something greater. The council had once been astonished by their fear. Now they were in awe of their resilience. And in the silence of the void, the council could feel something stirring. A new dawn was rising not just for humanity, but for the galaxy itself. The Galactic Council, once filled with doubt and astonishment at humanity's fear of war, now watched with a mix of curiosity and admiration. They had long assumed that fear of conflict spelled the end for civilizations. Yet here stood humanity emerging from the ashes of their past, not shattered, but stronger. It was an outcome the Council had never anticipated. They have faced their own destruction and survived. A delegate from a race of luminous beings observed, their voice reverberating like a distant echo of light. And in doing so, they found something we didn't predict. They've embraced their fragility, added the robotic delegate, their metallic tone tinged with a hint of surprise, and discovered resilience. Humanity, once known as a species driven by conflict and conquest, had accepted their history without being consumed by it. They didn't forget their past, but they didn't let it define their future either. The Council had once believed fear of war would crush them, but humanity had turned that fear into something far more powerful, hope. They ventured into the void of space, not driven by desperation, a delegate from a species of vast, tentacled beings observed, but by a renewed sense of purpose. They're not seeking dominance, a crystalline delegate added, their voice shimmering like stars. They seek understanding. The survivors had emerged from their isolation, no longer consumed by the specter of their past wars and failures. Instead, they were stepping into the galaxy with a newfound curiosity and unrelenting desire to explore, learn, and coexist. The fear that once drove them had been replaced by a thirst for discovery. Look at them, the crystalline delegate continued, their glowing form floating in awe. They are no longer afraid of their own power, but of what they can create. Humanity had become explorers again, not conquerors. Their old wars and conflicts had shaped them, but they were no longer the same species that once clung to their fear like a crutch. They had learned the limits of their destruction and embraced the potential of their survival. The Council couldn't help but marvel at this transformation. The species that once seemed destined to fade into oblivion had not only survived but thrived. They had risen from their history's darkest chapters and emerged stronger, proof that fear, even the deepest, most primal fears of war, didn't have to be the end. They've rebuilt what they lost, the robotic delegate mused, their metallic limbs folding into contemplation. And they've done so with the knowledge of what almost destroyed them. They've become something new, the crystalline delegate whispered, their voice barely audible in the vast emptiness of space. Something greater than they once were. The survivors of Earth were no longer clinging to the mistakes of their past. They were stepping forward into the unknown with a renewed sense of purpose and hope. They carried with them not the chains of fear, but the strength born from their own fragility and resilience. The Council, once astonished by their fear, had now come to realize that it wasn't fear itself that doomed civilizations, it was how they responded to it. They may not have the power they once held, the tentacled delegate observed, but they have something far more valuable, hope. Hope was a resource far more powerful than the weapons humanity had once wielded. It was the spark that had reignited their resolve and reignited their place among the stars. And now, as humanity ventured once more into the galaxy, they carried that hope like a beacon. "They are not perfect," the crystalline delegate said, their voice full of quiet reflection. "But they are persistent." The council, now watching from their distant vantage points, knew they had underestimated humanity. They had believed fear was the end of all things. Instead, humanity had turned fear into the very foundation of their rebirth. The survivors of Earth weren't just another civilization clinging to survival. They were explorers, learners, and creators. They had faced their past, embraced their limitations, and emerged with the strength to forge a new future. As they ventured further into the unknown, the Council couldn't help but be awed by what humanity had become. They weren't just surviving anymore, they were thriving. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Sci-Fi Horizons stories for more thrilling tales of science fiction and adventure.